UAE signed almost 25 FTAs in the last few years. India signed about 14 FTAs, which also kind of signals a lot of bilateral trade, new trade routes actually emerging as a result.
How excited are you by the opportunities of connecting the world, of trade, of continents emerging, of new geographies, creating new business avenues, of new trade routes, of new entrepreneurship? How excited are you? What is really, for you, the defining opportunities and perhaps maybe also the concerns that you may have?
Thanks, Samir. So first of all, 3,000 restrictions were kind of imposed in 2024 alone, right? But at the same time, there were FTAs signed left, right, and center. UAE signed almost 25 FTAs in the last few years. India signed about 14 FTAs, which also kind of signals a lot of bilateral trade, new trade routes actually emerging as a result. We've all heard of friendshoring, nearshoring. We've all heard of manufacturing bases actually getting closer to consumers. We've heard of new suppliers being actually chosen because there's supplier diversification that's actually taking place. Till about 5 years, 6 years back, most companies that I actually spoke to, they used to talk about only one boardroom discussion: how do I reduce my supplier base so that I actually reduce my cost? Because it's much easier to actually have a few suppliers to rely on, invest in them, invest in the relationship, and actually run your business. And now we're talking about supplier diversification. We're talking about new customers being chosen because there are restrictions being imposed. As a result, you're not able to trade with your existing customers as a result. So new trade routes emerging, and that's the exciting part. Cargo flows just like water in that sense. So water will find its way, and so will cargo, essentially. The economic compulsion of trading, the economic compulsion, will drive geopolitics is my positive view. And so therefore, a host of opportunities would result. And I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate this point. If you look at the India and the UAE sector, we're kind of working on a virtual trade corridor where the customs of both the nations essentially would come together, share information real time. Logistic companies would actually come on one platform together with, importers, exporters, the customs, truckers, shipping companies, all sharing information real time. And if the cargo is actually cleared in India, it need not be cleared in the UAE. And that's the pilot that we're running. And the other way around, right? If the cargo is cleared in the UAE, it just flows through India to the final destination and then cleared, almost seamlessly by the importer. And this is just the pilot project. And if you look at the IMEC corridor, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, and now the US is also wanting to join in. The IMEC corridor, originally in that sense, half the world's GDP, almost 2.2 billion people it will touch. The virtual trade corridor between India and UAE would essentially be the pilot of sorts. And similarly, we're actually working on a lot more subsets of the IMEC corridor as DP World to operationalize, to commercialize, talking about border protocols, talking about port community systems, logistic community systems, bringing the entire ecosystem literally on the same page so that the cargo actually flows seamlessly through the many nations that the IMEC corridor touches in that sense, and the cargo would flow per se. The other example is Africa, Samir. Africa, a lot of countries are landlocked. Logistics costs can be as much as 40%, 50%, 3-4 times this, the world average. Obviously, a lot of physical connectivity has to take place in Africa, and their DP World, the company that I work for, is heavily invested in the last mile connectivity, for example. Almost you could say, 200,000 points of sale in Nigeria alone. We're present in almost 35, 40 countries in Africa. The last mile connectivity is always the most difficult. The sea routes can be actually made. The IMEC and the other corridors can actually be made, but the last mile connectivity is equally important to ensure that the logistics cost is as low as possible. And we're working on the India, Middle East, Africa connectivity as another corridor, where traders from India essentially would ship cargo, go to Africa, have the last mile connectivity. Manufacturers from India would actually be given space in a special economic zone in Africa to produce so that they're actually closer to the large consumer base, but also close to the raw material availability in that sense. So we call it the Bharat-Africa Setu, or the Bharat-Africa Bridge in that sense. So the virtual trade corridor between India and UAE, the India-Africa connectivity, also via Dubai, for example. And I'll give you one example that I actually just had a customer work with DP World. We had a auto component manufacturer in India in that sense, and they had 12 points of inventory stockage in Africa. And their problem was that they were either overstocked out there or they were understocked, and they were always losing money. So we actually had them stock cargo in Dubai, and then real time actually move into Africa as and when the demand actually arises. And that actually saved them almost 30-40% of their logistics cost as such. So that's a real life example of how we can actually be innovative in terms of supply chain. And we all know in Africa, the infrastructure development is critically important, but the money is also not flowing out there. It represents only about 2% of the entire supply chain spent globally of almost $2 trillion. So Africa just gets about 2%. So, connecting countries in Africa with the rest of the world, connecting Africa with Africa, are those real connectivity challenges that we all need to invest in.
But still, it's a very, very optimistic view of the world. Do you do business in Europe?
Yes, we do. We do. We do a lot of business in Europe. And of course, there are a lot of challenges out there as well. But I see a glass half full, Samir.